وسلم على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So before we start, inshallah, I'll just be very, very brief. We want to understand something about fiqh traditions, because this book is essentially a fiqh book, even though it's a hadith book. So Ali al-Madini was one of the great teachers of Imam Bukhari. He tells us, he says, there were none among the companions of the Prophet ﷺ who had students who would give fatwa according to their opinions and adopt their way, save for three: Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Zayd ibn Thabit, and Ibn Abbas. So what are we talking about? We're talking about fiqh traditions, fiqh schools that started with the Prophet ﷺ and from the Sahaba and then on. So we have these three main fuqaha who had, he said, each had students who adopted their teachers' positions and gave fatwa. So they mentions, for example, the students of Abdullah Mas'ud, and who used to يَذْهَبُونَ مَذْهَبَهُ, who used to follow his madhab. So his students who used to follow the madhab of Abdullah Mas'ud, for example. And so, very roughly speaking, we can talk about three proto-madhabs, three madhabs for the four madhab. The madhab of Iraq, the madhab of Medina, and the madhab of Mecca. I'll give my laptop here. So the main, the main sheikh and the most significant scholar of the Iraqi school is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. The main sheikh of of Meccan school is Abdullah ibn Abbas, and one of the main shuyukh of the Medinan school was Zayd ibn Thabit. And so what we had then is we have Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and others in Kufa, and his students and his grandstudents, and Abdullah ibn Abbas in Mecca and his students and his grandstudents, and Zayd ibn Thabit and others of Medina and his students and their grandstudents. And each starts to have a trend. There are certain ways they do fiqh, certain opinions that they have, certain stances that they hold. Okay, and so this we can roughly call the Kufan school, the school of Kufa in Iraq. And we can roughly call Ibn Abbas and his students and his students and those scholars and their opinions, the Meccan school, and then the Medinan school. Right? And so of the greatest, Ali al-Madini mentions that of the greatest proponents of this Kufan school was Sufyan al-Thawri, right, of Kufa. And Ali al-Madini tells us that, for example, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who's contemporary with Imam Malik and one of the Imam Shafi's teachers, and Ibn Jurayj with a kind of the peak of the Meccan school. And Malik ibn Anas, the author of our book, the Muwatta, is at the peak of the Medinan school. So here we have Imam Malik, right? And we can add other people really at the top here. So people like Sayyidina Ali is very significant in the Kufan school. People like Aisha radiallahu anha, very significant. Abdullah ibn Umar, extremely significant. We're going to see him coming up a lot. So Aisha and Abdullah ibn Umar are going to come up a lot in the Muwatta. So what are we looking at in this book? This is the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad. The Muwatta of Imam Muhammad. So this is a hadith book. A hadith book that is narrated by Imam Muhammad, who is the student of Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa and Sufyan al-Thawri are some of the greatest products of this Kufan school, arguably the greatest. And Imam Abu Hanifa is the teacher of Imam Muhammad. So Imam Muhammad, what is he doing in this book? He is comparing two great schools, the Kufan school and the Medinan school, right? So what we're going to be seeing him doing is he studies with Imam Abu Hanifa, narrates and the Kufan school, right? In his books, for example, Kitab al-Athar, which is also translated by Turath, right? And he comes to Medina and he studies with Imam Malik after the death of Imam Abu Hanifa. And he compares and he contrasts, but ultimately he defends his school. And see, we will see him saying things like, this is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. So he's defending the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. And he'll say things like, this is the position of the majority of our scholars. So Imam Muhammad, who's coming out of this school, will say, the majority of our scholars. What does he mean, the majority of our scholars? That means that there is a school. It's not just like him and Imam Abu Hanifa sitting in a mosque reading the Quran and Sunnah. Rather, there's a whole scholarly precedent, a whole school, a whole way of, a whole process, a whole way of thinking that is the Kufan school. And he's going to compare and contrast it with the Medinan way. And this is not the first time it will happen. Imam Shafi will do the same thing. Right? Imam Shafi'i is more coming out of the Medinan school and comparing it against the Kufan school, right? And what about the Meccan school then? The Meccan school, generally speaking, is somewhat weak. It doesn't have to compare to the strength and numbers as the Medina and Meccan school, but we will see now and then that the Kufan school will draw from the Meccan school and etc. Right? And so Ibn Abbas will come up, these things will come up, etc. But it's not as strong. And so it's important to understand Imam Malik, he is a flag holder for the Medinan school, and he is promoting the Medinan school. Imam Muhammad is a flag holder for the Kufan school, and he's comparing and contrasting it. So this, if we could translate this book into a very poetic title, we would call it A Tale of Two Cities. A Tale of Two Cities. And not just two cities, but two cities or two fiqh traditions of the greatest traditions. And so why is this book so important? It's so important because with the clash of these two cities, with the clash of these two early schools of the Salaf, of the early Muslims, we see the majority of the major debates in fiqh. The majority of the major debates in fiqh. The main issues of debate. So the debates between Imam Shafi and Imam Malik are not really as much as between Imam Shafi and Imam Abu Hanifa, right? And so for this reason, we're going to find historically the Shafi'is and Hanafis really battling it out, because the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis and Malikis are very close, and the Hanafis are on the part of the other camp. So in reality, the reason why they'll traditionally battle it out in a scholarly sense is because it's completely different. Very, very different. And for this reason, we find that Imam Muhammad as well, he doesn't just compose this work, he also writes a whole book against the Medinan school, proving that Medinan school is wrong. Now, to be fair, he's a person of insaf, and he's not biased. He does actually adopt some of the Medinan's positions here and there, as we will see. And that's important because that comes into the Hanafi school as we know it today. There are certain things from the Medinan school that come into the Hanafi school as we know it today, right? And this is just an idea that any school of fiqh goes through a process of refinement and addition, and that's what we see with the Hanafi school and Maliki school, any of the schools, etc. Okay, so do we understand then? Right? Can everyone agree that we all understand what this book is? Here we have these madhabs, opinions, positions, ideas of different from the early Muslims on one side, from the early Muslims on the other side, and they are meeting at this battle, which is held between Imam Muhammad, Imam Malik. So this is an extremely important book. Shaykh Waliullah Dahlawi, he said the first textbook in Shafi fiqh is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So, well, how it was written before Imam Shafi was born? How does that make sense? How can it be the first textbook in Shafi fiqh? Because Shafi fiqh is based greatly on the Medina school, right? It is very different. There's clear, significant differences between the Maliki school and the Shafi school on a methodological level, in terms of answers, in terms of many things. However, it's essentially a sharh, and the Shafi school is a tweak of the Medina school. right? He drew from the Kufan school, drew from other schools, but it's a tweak of the Medina school. Whereas Imam Muhammad's positions, Imam Qadi Abu Yusuf's position are a tweak or a product of the Kufan school. Okay, so can everyone see the importance of this book? Right? Is it the most authentic book? Meaning, are all the hadiths here as Sahih as Bukhari? No, but that's fairly irrelevant. It's fairly irrelevant. Why? Because sihha, authenticity, sihha, when we say this is super Sahih hadith, generally speaking, yes, we find that in the Muwatta. But there's a difference between the fiqh schools and the hadith schools. Hadith is about hadith narrators and finding problems in hadiths and who's a good narrator and who's a bad narrator. Fiqh is about fiqh traditions, fiqh mentalities, ways of analyzing things, etc. Right? So they're two different things. So in terms of fiqh, in terms of halal, haram, this book is way more important. Way more important. Okay? Than, for example, Bukhari or Muslim. What does it mean? You can, inshallah, so Wahideen is my mum, by the way, everybody. So, mashallah, please, can everyone give us salam, inshallah, my mum is here. So, inshallah, Mama, when the book comes, in the beginning, there'll be a discussion. It's not really known exactly, but many scholars say Muwatta means the agreed upon, but it's not really clear exactly what the Muwatta means. But you can, in the beginning of the book, inshallah, there's a whole discussion on what it means, inshallah. What was I going to say? What was I going to say? And so if we compare this book to, for example, the normal Muwatta of Imam Malik tells us the Medina school. If we compare this to Bukhari doesn't tell us either school. Bukhari is about super Sahih hadiths. It's not really to do with fiqh. There's a lot of fiqh in it. A lot of fiqh in Bukhari, but it's not really to do with fiqh proper. Okay, which hadith books are to do with fiqh then? The Sunan. So Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Nasa'i, etc. So those books, for example, are much more significant when it comes to halal haram, right? But again, they don't show us necessarily athar. They don't necessarily show us the positions of Sahaba as well. So this book is much more rounded as what is the main points of difference of agreement. Do we join prayers? Do we not join prayers? Can you force a woman to get married? Can you not force a woman to get married? Main points of, for example, difference of fiqh. Dar al-Harb, can you do riba in Dar al-Harb? Can you not do riba in Dar al-Harb, for example? These kind of major discussions, major points of difference of agreement among the fuqaha, these are basically all here. Okay. And what we will see, this is what I remember now, what we will see is there are certain Sahaba, so obviously the Prophet ﷺ is the Shaykh of all the madhahib, right? All the madhahib come from the Prophet ﷺ. But from them as well, there are the Shaykhain, Sayyidina Umar and Abu Bakr. We will find them in all traditions. So in the Kufan tradition, they'll be quoting Umar and Abu Bakr. In the Medinan school, in the Meccan school, they'll all be doing that. Okay, khair. So let's start then, inshallah. Just have a PDF of this. I do have a PDF, actually. PDF of the book itself. The Arabic. As I mentioned in the forum, it's a good idea to follow along with the Muwatta of Al-Qa'nabi. So the Muwatta is a collection of Imam Malik, right? It's a collection by Imam Malik. Now, this has been narrated from him in the form of a Muwatta by many people, hundreds of people more likely. But there's like 17 major narrations of it. So the most authentic one is Qa'nabi. Right? But otherwise, Imam Malik is a key hadith narrator, and people narrate hadiths from him all the time. We find him throughout the 6 books. He'll always be mentioned as a hadith narrator. Many or most of those hadiths that we'll find in Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, etc., they will be in reality just free narrations, so to speak, a narration of the same hadith as in the Muwatta, but in a different chapter or in a different way. Right? It's just the same hadith as in the Muwatta. Right? So generally speaking, the Muwatta is the, so to speak, is the core of all the hadith books. Right? It's the core of all the hadith books. And so it's an extremely important book. Right? Definitely more important than the 6 books, without question. So would anybody like to read? The English.
I can read it if you want.
Would anybody like to read?
I can read.
Who has that? Who has? I know it's early. Who has managed to get the book ready? Abdul Ghani, everyone got the book?
I have the English version.
Yeah. Okay, great. So Abdul Ghani, you have the English version. Could you read then, inshallah, from the beginning, just from the first chapter? It's funny reading a book like this. You read it backwards. I'm still reading. So I believe it starts on page 51.
Page 51.
51, yeah.
Muhammad ibn Anas said, Malik ibn Anas informed us from Yazid ibn Zayd and Mawla Abu Hasham that Abdullah ibn Rafi, the Mawla of Salama,
So Mawla, what does Mawla mean? It means the freed slave or the person of the family of the freed slave. Right, so Abdul Ghani owns me and my family. He sets me and my family free. I'm his Mawla. Okay, I'm his Mawla. So the Mawla of Salama.
The mother of Salama, the wife of the Prophet, asked Abu Huraira about the times of the prayer, and Abu Huraira said, I will tell you prayer, Zuhr, when the length of your shadow is equal to your height, and Asr when your shadow is twice your height, and Maghrib when the sun has set, and Isha from then until the passing of a third of the night. And should you sleep until the passing of the half the night, then let your eyes not sleep and pray subh in the darkness.
Right. So let's look at it very carefully. So it says the hadith says that Abu Huraira said. So is this a hadith or is this what we call an athar? Are we quoting the Prophet ﷺ or are we quoting Abu Huraira here?
Abu Huraira.
Right.
Quoting Abu Huraira. So this is what we call an athar. Right? The words of Sahabi is called an athar, or called a mawquf hadith. A mawquf hadith. Okay. Just Nas, you don't need to raise your hand. You can just speak.
No, that'll be accident. My bad.
Okay. So let's read it carefully. So it says, "I will tell you prayer times." Okay. Pray dhuhr when the length of your shadow is equal to your height. Right. Meaning until so pray dhuhr when the length of your shadow is equal to your height. What does that mean? That would mean that you were to stand up and your shadow is so long the same height as you. That means pray it until that time. Up until the time that your shadow, the height of the object, the length of the shadow is the same height as an object. That is going to be the end of dhuhr. And asr when your shadow is twice your height. I don't pray asr when it's twice your height, but rather pray up to that time, right? And maghrib when the sun has set, and isha from then, from the sun has set, until the passing of 1/3 of the night. Notice he's giving you the end times. He's not praying. He's not saying you can start from maghrib. He's giving you the end time. So the end time for dhuhr is when the shadow, when there's something that's 2 meters tall and the shadow is 2 meters tall. The end time for asr here is when the thing is 2 meters tall and the shadow is 4 meters. And maghrib when the sun sets, and isha until the passing of 1/3 of the night. Right? So isha, maghrib comes in. He doesn't give us the beginning of isha. He doesn't tell us the beginning of isha, but it says pray isha before 1/3 of the night finishes. So, for example, where I am in San Francisco, maghrib is at 5:30, and fajr is at 5. So between 5:30 and 5 is approximately 12 hours. So 1/3 of the night is 4 hours. So that means 4 hours after maghrib, you should have prayed isha. So that means here in San Francisco, you should have prayed isha before 9:30. Okay. And then he says, and you should sleep until passing. You should sleep. And he said, and should you sleep until passing half of the night, then let your eyes not sleep. Meaning, if you go to sleep after maghrib and sleep till, for example, the end of isha and wake up and pray isha at the end of it, he says, may you not do that. May you not have rest. Right, that's wrong. And pray subh in the darkness. So notice all of these points are in contradistinction with the Hanafis, almost. All of these points here. So here he's quoting Malik, he's pointing this point, and then he's going to explain something else here. So he's telling us, number one, that he's going to give us explanation, but number one, we know that in the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali school, Asr starts when it's a shadow, when the object which is a meter tall is the shadow which is a meter in length is the same as the object which is a meter in height. All right, that's the beginning, presuming you're on the equator. That's the beginning of Asr. That's not the position of Imam Abu Hanifa. The Imam position is no, when it's twice. So this hadith gives sense that number one, dhuhr comes before the time that you're saying, and number two, that Asr, when you're saying Asr begins, that's actually almost the end of Asr. This time you shouldn't even be praying at that time. Okay, and so notice he mentions that, and he mentions half of the night, and then he says, pray subh in the darkness. What is the sunnah in the Hanafi school? To pray it with isfar, is that you delay it until, let's say, half an hour before sunrise, so that more people come to the mosque and pray. Okay, so he's putting something out there, and he's saying, this is what we have for Athar from Abu Hurairah, where is he most significant? He's most significant in the Medinan school. So Imam Abu Hurairah is super significant in hadith narration, but less significant in fiqh. He's significant, but less significant. But here, this quotation to basically, he's quoting it, and then he's going to rebut it and explain it in another way. Okay, so any immediate questions?
Ustad, I had a question.
Go ahead, yeah.
You said Imam Abu Hanifa, I guess to put it, was contrary to the other three Imams in the Asr time.
Right.
But doesn't Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan agree with the majority on that, and Abu Yusuf?
Exactly, and this is where we're seeing it happen. So this is one of the scenarios where we see that these schools that Imam Muhammad is actually going to get.
Oh, okay, exactly, okay.
Right, and that's right. So then when someone comes along and says, oh, I don't believe in the Hanafi school because the Hanafi school is weak in hadith, you're like, what are you talking about, weak in hadith? Since when? When was the Hanafi school weak in hadith? Since when did not have giants that critically received and critically analyzed and disagreed with the Hanafi school and changed a position? Right, and this is something that happens in all schools. Every single school was criticized internally. They don't They don't need our modern, oh, where's the dalil, akhi? No, they themselves critique their own school. Right?
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm just trying to get a picture because obviously it's the first hadith, so I suppose this is the hadith that will set the tone. I just want to be clear. It's a hadith from, in a way, like from like a big sheikh in the Hanafi school, but it's actually contrary to the main line of the Hanafi madhab, and it is basically it's, as you said earlier, it's quoting from the Medinan school.
Correct. Yeah.
So what is the purpose of that? Is it a purpose to what would you say is the purpose of that?
So Imam Muhammad is again, this is this clash between these two traditions, and he is standing at that point, and sometimes he will go to the sometimes when he's convinced of the Medina school, he'll go to the Medina school.
So is he taking this hadith as a proof for?
I don't think we're really going to see him here, but in other works we will see him. So we don't always see. One of the problems when you look at these early works is you don't necessarily see the whole discussion. For example, Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Hanifa, sometimes Imam Malik in Muwatta himself is extremely vague. So for example, we know in the Maliki school, the Maliki Shafi school, we do Qunut al-Fajr, right? It's slightly different, but in between the two schools, but it's still, we have this idea of Qunut al-Fajr. So Imam Malik in the Muwatta quotes Ibn Umar, who was the most significant person, one of the most significant person in the Medinan school, did not used to do the Qunut al-Fajr. Full stop, new chapter. And you're like, hang on a minute, what is Imam Malik trying to say then? Like, I don't get what he's trying to say. Obviously, you as Imam Malik, you told us to do the Qunut, and you say this is Amal of Ahl Medina, but you're saying that Ibn Umar didn't do it, and you don't even quote a single hadith about the Prophet and do it, and you don't even quote a single athar to prove your case. It's very odd. So here, we won't necessarily always see what every single thing that Imam Muhammad is doing, right? And that's very, very common in early works, because we have to remember this book is written, is dying like 1,300 years ago, right? And so if we compare it, for example, against the Hanafi school positions for Imam Muhammad that we know, we compare against other things. For example, his book on, I think it's called Al-Hujja ala Amal Ahmadina or something, or Al-Mahaj, I can't remember one of the words. We'll see a bigger picture. But we know, for example, as students, that Imam Muhammad, he was of that position. So in reality, we see him explaining the Hanafi school, or Imam, not the Hanafi position, but we see that he's actually going to the quote unquote the dark side, right? He's going to the other side, which is his right and rather his obligation as a mujtahid.
Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, but as a disclaimer, we won't always see exactly what he's doing.
Okay.
Which is sometimes difficult.
Okay.
Okay. If whoever was reading before could continue to read. Muhammad said,
this was the verdict of Abu Hanifa. May Allah have mercy on him.
What he's doing, he says, this is the verdict of Abu Hanifa. Meaning actually he's going to turn the hadith around, and he does this a lot, looking at the same key central hadith in a different way, right? So this is the verdict of Abu Hanifa. May Allah have mercy on him. Concerning time of Asr.
Concerning the time of Asr, he used to consider the time when the dawn glow.
Your interpretation of this quote is wrong. Your interpretation is Asr either kana dhilluka mithlak, not a problem, right? Asr, when your two shadows, that's when it begins, right? Not that when it ends. That's not that is when it ends. However, he used to say, we could say here, you could add the word wakana, or you could translate that as however he used to. So wow sometimes means however. It's important, right? Wakana yara isfar. However, he used to consider the time of dawn glowed clearly as fajr. As for our verdict, notice, Carl, right? As for our verdict, right? Okay, go ahead.
As for our verdict, we say that when the shadow of an object has grown longer than the object, and therefore has arrived at and exceeded the length of the object as the sun moves beyond its zenith, then the time of Asr has arrived.
So
As
he
for Abu Han,
so Imam Muhammad takes the position of the Jumhur, which is Asr is when the shadow is at the length of the object plus the length at Zawal. So same as the Shafi'is, same as the everyone else. And so this is important as a practical thing. And I would seriously advise all Hanafis here not to pray Dhuhr at the end of the Hanafi Dhuhr time. Why? Because you're going against the Shafi'is, Hanbalis, Malikis, Imam Muhammad, and I believe Qadi Abu Yusuf as well, if I remember correctly. So you're going against the vast majority, right? And so it's a dispensation. You can take it sometimes, whatever, that's fine. But ideally, as a system, you shouldn't be doing that. You should keep your dhuhr within the position of the jumhur, right? Okay.
As for Abu Hanifa, he said that the time of Asr does not arrive until the shadow of an object becomes twice its length.
Mm-hmm. Good. And then let's just finish this chapter, inshallah. So it says, Malik informed us, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri informed me that Urwa Zubayr said, Aisha narrated to me that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ used to pray Asr. So where's the next hadith here? Mentions these positions. He used to pray Asr when the sun was shining in her room before it had itself become visible, meaning basically the sun is very, very high. That's the point. So the hadith is quite complex to explain, and we don't have time to explain the whole thing. But the point is, she used to pray Asr when the sun was very, very high, i.e., definitely way before the Hanafi time. And Malik informed us, Ibn Shihab Zuhri informed me that Anas ibn Malik said, we used to pray Asr when someone would leave to go to Quba and reach them while the sun was still high. Right, so again, very early on. The Asr would come in and we pray it early. Malik informed us, Ishaq ibn Abdullah ibn Abi Talha, where is it? Yeah. Informed us that Anas ibn Malik said we used to pray Asr and then someone would go out to Bani Amr ibn Auf and find them praying Asr, i.e. so we would pray Asr so quickly that we go out them and find them praying it. Imam Muhammad says praying Asr later is better in our view than praying it sooner, provided you pray it while the sun is white and pure and before yellowness appears. That is the import of the majority of narrations and is also the verdict of Abu Hanifa. Indeed, some of the fuqaha have said it is called Asr for no other reason than it being squeezed, tu'asr, and delayed. Right? And this I was listening to Sheikh Nu'man Ali Khan, may Allah reward him and benefit us through him. He was talking about Surah Al-Asr and he was saying that Asr doesn't mean by time. Right? It means that squeezed time, the time that you have no time left, i.e. by the fact that you have no time left. Innal insana lafi khusr, which is quite, I had never heard that before. May Allah reward him. Right. Okay, but so practical upshot. Right. In terms of what's happening here, we see this debate. Imam Muhammad is showing us the debate. When does Asr come in? When does this other time comes in? And it doesn't mention the whole picture there. But practical issue is we should pray. We should pray Dhuhr way before the Hanafi Asr begins, because that means we're sticking within the position of the Jumhur. Wallahu a'lam. Inshallah, we'll stop here. Any immediate questions?
I have.
We are follow the timetable of nearby mosque. No, you should follow. You can just go on to Islamic Finder, so islamicfinder.com, and put in Shafi or like non-Hanafi. If you put in the Hanafi, you'll see the times are different. Like it'll be like half an hour, 1 hour different depending on the time of the year. Right, so we should follow everything.
Sheikh had a question.
Yeah, bismillah.
So, what if I am in a hurry to leave the house, and I know that if I leave, for example, Asr is gonna be out of the time. It's gonna be qadha, right? So is it possible to combine it in that way? You
mean to follow the Jumhur and pray Asr early?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that. So this is an example of following another madhab when you're not doing anything dangerous. You're following the majority of the ulama since the time of the Prophet. It's not a big deal. Like, for example, joining prayers once or twice in your life because of whatever. It's not the end of the world, because it's the position of the vast majority of ulama. you know, as opposed to putting yourself out on a limb where you're just following Ibn Jarir al-Tabari on something. It's like, that's dangerous. But here is the majority of the ulama, you know, say that Asr came in half an hour ago. I'll pray it now. No problem.
Okay, all right. Okay, so all right.
Can I ask make a comment point? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Salam. I have something in my mind from a long while ago that I think Abu, for some reason, not that I can quote anything or give a source, but I thought there was Abu Hanifa considered it to be adab to delay Asr.
I mean not obligatory?
No, in the sense that it was a prayer that should be prayed kind of later in a sense, you know. Yeah, that's kind of contrary to the idea of praying in the first hour.
So later meaning
later meaning in not necessarily to do with the actual time in fiqh, not his ijtihad, but just that was his preference, in a similar way to praying Aisha later than.
I honestly don't know. I don't know, and you have to ask a Hanafi. I don't know.
Okay, because that would make sense if that were the case. That
I think even for the Hanafis, like for the Hanafis, like so in the Shafi school, we can pray Asr like 5 minutes before Maghrib. It's not sinful. I think for the Hanafis, it is sinful. I think.
Is it makruh to do that?
Yeah, that's that. You can't pray that late. Yeah, you get into a dangerous zone.
Yeah. So for us, like basically, as long as you, I mean, it's very makruh, but it's not sinful. So Allahu Alam, I don't know. You have to ask a Hanafi. So alhamdulillah, we have Abdul Ghani here and maybe some other Hanafis that can help us get through this book, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum.